May 5th, 1993. A small town in Arkansas tucks its children into bed, unaware that a nightmare is just beginning. Three second-grade boys, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, ride their bikes through the quiet streets of West Memphis. By nightfall, they vanish. The next day, their lifeless bodies are discovered in a drainage ditch, naked, bound, and brutalized. The scene is haunting. The town, forever changed. Rumors swirl through churches and schools. Whispers of satanic rituals, cults, and dark forces infect the air. Soon, police zero in on three local teenagers: Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miss Kelly. Teenagers who didn't fit in. Teenagers who listened to heavy metal, wore black, and read Stephen King. That was enough. But from the moment of their arrest, something felt wrong. The evidence, fragile. The confession, questionable. The motives, built on fear. If these three boys were innocent, then the real killer walked free. This is the story of shattered lives, a divided town, and a justice system pushed to the edge. This is the story of the West Memphis Three. Before we continue, we want to take a moment to thank you. If you're watching this, it means you care about uncovering the truth and giving a voice to those who may have been silenced. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do us a favor, hit that subscribe button. It may seem small, but to us it's a huge encouragement to keep producing the deep, detailed stories you deserve. Now let's go back to the day it all began. West Memphis, Arkansas. May 5th, 1993. A typical Wednesday afternoon in a working-class neighborhood just across the Mississippi River from Memphis, Tennessee. At around 5:30 p.m., three best friends, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, leave their homes to play. It's nothing unusual. They've done it 100 times before, riding bikes, exploring, laughing. They were just 8 years old. By nightfall, panic has set in. Stevie's mother, Pam Hobbs, calls her husband Terry. Christopher's adoptive father, John Mark Byers, is already out searching. Michael's parents are calling neighbors. One by one, the boys' families realize no one has seen them since late afternoon. Calls flood the West Memphis Police Department. Officers respond, but there is no sense of urgency. Some assume the boys ran off. Others believe they'll return by morning. But morning comes, and there are no signs of Stevie, Christopher, or Michael. May 6th, Robin Hood Hills, a patch of woods behind a truck stop. The area is dense, overgrown, and shadowed by power lines and concrete ditches. Around 1:45 p.m., a juvenile parole officer searching the area spots a child's black shoe floating in a shallow, muddy drainage canal. Soon after, police make a gruesome discovery. Three small bodies, naked and hogtied with their own shoelaces, submerged in less than 2 feet of water. Their bikes are found hidden beneath a nearby ditch, their clothes tangled in the weeds. One boy, Christopher Byers, bears the worst injuries. His body shows signs of mutilation. His genitals are gone. The other two, Stevie and Michael, show bruising and signs of drowning. There are scratches, ligature marks, and something else. Something even more chilling. The sheer carelessness of the scene. No attempt to hide the bodies. No sign of a struggle elsewhere. It's as if the killer or killers wanted them to be found. By evening, the news spreads like wildfire. A triple child homicide. In a small, conservative town, the kind of thing people only read about in tabloids or see in horror films. Television crews set up outside the crime scene. Reporters ask impossible questions. Parents clutch their children closer. And in the vacuum of truth, suspicion rushes in. Some whisper of drug addicts. Others speak of sexual predators. But one theory spreads faster than all the rest. Satanic ritual murder. In the weeks to come, fear will harden into blame. And the town of West Memphis will find its scapegoats in three teenage boys who looked different. But before that, before the arrests and the outrage and the years of controversy, there was just grief. Pure, raw, and unending. Three families lost their children, and West Memphis lost its innocence. With three children brutally murdered, the West Memphis Police Department found itself at the center of a storm. The town wanted answers. The media demanded action. The pressure to find a suspect was immediate and immense. But behind closed doors, investigators were already developing a theory, one not built on evidence but on fear. Satanic ritual, occult sacrifice, devil worship. The early 90s were the peak of what would come to be known as the Satanic Panic. Across the United States, communities were gripped by the belief that underground cults were harming children. Wild claims spread through talk shows, pulpits, and police training sessions. It was hysteria masquerading as justice. And in West Memphis, that hysteria had found a target. Damian Eccles. At just 18 years old, Damian was well known in the community, not for violence, but for being different. He wore black clothes, listened to Metallica, studied Wicca, he read Stephen King, wrote dark poetry, and was fascinated by the spiritual. In a town steeped in conservative Christianity, Damian stood out like a lightning rod.
His best friend Jason Baldwin, 16, was quieter, artistic, thoughtful, a good student. But his association with Damian would soon cost him everything. Then came Jesse Miskelly. 17 years old, with a reported IQ of 72, Jesse struggled in school and was easily influenced. He knew Damian and Jason loosely, but one call to the police would change all of their lives. On June 3, 1993, nearly a month after the murders, Jesse Miskelly was brought in for questioning. What followed was a marathon 12-hour interrogation, no lawyer present, no parent notified. After hours of pressure, suggestion, and contradiction, Jesse confessed. He said he witnessed Damian and Jason murder the boys. He placed them at the crime scene, described a scene of ritualistic violence. But there were problems. Big ones. Jesse's timeline didn't match. He got basic facts wrong, like what time the murders happened or how the boys were tied. He changed his story multiple times, and the confession, it was riddled with contradictions. Despite all of that, the police had what they needed.
A confession, however shaky, and 3 names.
Damian Eccles was arrested later that same day. Jason Baldwin was picked up soon after. Jesse, though barely understanding the charges against him, would be tried separately. To the public, the police had cracked the case. The nightmare had a name, or 3. But in the shadows of the supposed victory, cracks were already forming. No physical evidence tied the teens to the crime. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no DNA, nothing. Just a town desperate for justice, and 3 boys who didn't belong. In the weeks to follow, the prosecution would build a case on rumor, fear, and the fragile testimony of a frightened teenager. The West Memphis Three were no longer just suspects. They were symbols of something deeper and darker. By early 1994, the stage was set. The state of Arkansas prepared to put 3 teenagers on trial for one of the most horrifying crimes in its history. There was no forensic evidence, no murder weapon, no direct eyewitnesses, and yet the prosecution believed they had enough. Their key piece, Jesse Miskelly's confession, though riddled with errors and inconsistencies, prosecutors would use it as the foundation to convict not only Jesse, but Damian and Jason as well. The trials would be split. Jesse Miskelly was tried first. Separately, his attorneys argued that the confession had been coerced, that his low IQ made him vulnerable, that he didn't even understand what he had agreed to. But the jury didn't agree. After just 1 day of deliberation, Jesse was found guilty of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years. Next came the trial of Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin. The stakes were even higher. Prosecutors sought the death penalty for Damian, life imprisonment for Jason. The courtroom was packed, media swarmed outside, supporters of the victims cried for justice. Others came simply to gawk at the satanic teens on trial. To bolster their case, the state called a so-called occult expert, a man with no formal training in ritualistic crimes, who claimed that the murders matched patterns found in satanic practices. His conclusion, Damian was a danger. Not just because of what he may have done, but because of what he believed. The trial focused heavily on Damian's interests, his poetry, his black clothing, his books. The prosecution painted him as a cult leader. Jason, his loyal follower. Jesse, the weak-willed recruit. It wasn't a trial based on physical evidence. It was a trial based on image, on fear, and on cultural panic. Family members of the victims watched on, broken, desperate for closure. To them, this was justice in action. But others in the courtroom, legal observers, journalists, and even some jurors began to feel the weight of doubt. Still, on March 18, 1994, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty. Jason Baldwin, life without parole. Damian Eccles, sentenced to death by lethal injection. Just like that, the West Memphis Three were no longer just suspects. They were convicts, stripped of freedom, branded forever. But outside the courtroom, a movement was beginning. People were asking questions. Writers, musicians, celebrities, investigators. If the state had gotten it wrong, if the real killer was still out there, how would they ever find the truth? And how would Damien, Jason, and Jesse survive a life behind bars for a crime they claimed they didn't commit? The trials had ended, but the story of the West Memphis Three was far from over. 1994. Damien Echols entered death row at the Varner Supermax unit in Arkansas. He was just 19. Jason Baldwin was sent to a maximum security prison to serve life without parole. Jesse Kelly began his sentence in isolation, his mind barely able to process what had happened. For the state, the case was closed. For the families of the victims, justice had been served. But for the West Memphis Three, a new nightmare had begun. Damien spent 23 hours a day in a concrete cell. Solitary confinement, fluorescent lights buzzing endlessly overhead. Books became his escape. Meditation, his survival. Jason, just 16 when arrested, now had to navigate the violent world of adult prison. He kept to himself, he drew, he read, he waited. Jesse, the most vulnerable of the three, struggled the most. He didn't understand the legal system, didn't grasp the magnitude of his own words, and couldn't take back what he'd said. But beyond the prison walls, something was happening. In 1996, a documentary aired on HBO. Its title, Paradise Lost: The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills. Filmmakers Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky had spent months filming inside the courtroom, in homes and inside prisons. What they captured shocked the world. Viewers saw what the jury didn't, how thin the evidence really was, how weak the confession sounded, how the trials focused more on image than proof. The public started asking questions, and so began a movement. Celebrities like Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam, Natalie Maines of the Chicks, and actor Johnny Depp became outspoken advocates. Thousands of fans joined online forums, petition drives spread across the country. Donations poured in. More documentaries followed. Books, radio interviews, podcasts. Millions began to believe that Damien, Jason, and Jesse were innocent. And behind the scenes, a legal team bolstered by private investigators and pro bono attorneys began digging into the original case files. They discovered disturbing inconsistencies. Police notes were missing. Interviews had been poorly documented. DNA testing, now more advanced, had never been fully conducted on evidence from the crime scene. Witnesses had recanted. Some admitted they lied. Others claimed they were pressured. And perhaps most damning, none of the DNA recovered from the scene matched Damien, Jason, or Jesse. Inside the prison walls, hope began to flicker. Outside, the world was listening. But freedom would not come easily. The state of Arkansas had made up its mind in 1994, and reversing a murder conviction, let alone three, would take something more powerful than public outrage. It would take undeniable proof, and that was finally coming. As the years dragged on, Damien Echols sat on death row. Time became the enemy. Appeals failed, hopes dimmed, and then science caught up. In 2007, a powerful new tool would finally be allowed in court: DNA testing. For the first time, advanced forensic analysis was applied to the physical evidence collected from the crime scene in 1993. Shoes, clothes, ligatures, hairs. And what the results revealed stunned even longtime supporters of the West Memphis Three. None of the DNA matched Damien, Jason, or Jesse. But one strand of hair recovered from a ligature used to tie up one of the victims matched a man named Terry Hobbs. Terry Hobbs, stepfather of Stevie Branch, one of the murdered boys. Terry had never been seriously investigated. He had no alibi. His DNA was never tested during the original case. And now, nearly 15 years later, his hair was found tied to a murdered child's body. There were other troubling signs. Witnesses came forward saying they'd seen Terry acting suspiciously the night of the murders. Family members described violent tendencies. His own nephew claimed Terry confessed to being involved. The defense team didn't stop there. They presented evidence that the confession by Jesse Kelly had been manipulated by detectives, that jurors had been exposed to inadmissible testimony, that the jury foreman may have discussed the case with outsiders before deliberations. It all added up to one thing: a deeply broken trial, and possibly the wrong men behind bars. In 2010, after years of delays, Damien's legal team filed a motion for a new trial. They argued that the original convictions had been based on false evidence, flawed science, and a culture of fear. The Arkansas Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. For the first time in over 17 years, freedom didn't seem impossible. It seemed within reach. But there was a problem. The state wasn't ready to admit wrongdoing. They feared a retrial could collapse the entire system. That jurors might ask why three teenagers were locked away for nearly 2 decades without a shred of physical proof. And so, A controversial offer was placed on the table. It was called the Alford plea. Under this plea, the defendants could assert their innocence while legally acknowledging that the state had enough evidence to convict them. It was a legal paradox. Freedom at the cost of full exoneration. For Damien, time was running out. He believed his execution could be scheduled at any moment. For Jason and Jesse, it was a bitter choice. But after 18 years, the West Memphis Three made a decision. August 19, 2011, 18 years after their arrest, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Kelly were brought to the Craighead County Courthouse in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Inside, a deal was finalized behind closed doors. In a matter of hours, the men who had spent half their lives behind bars for a crime they insisted they didn't commit would be offered their freedom. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, supporters, family members of the victims. The mood was tense, fragile, hovering between disbelief and outrage. One by one, the West Memphis Three entered pleas under the Alford Doctrine. They maintained their innocence, but legally acknowledged that the state had enough evidence to convict. It was a compromise that satisfied no one but freed them all. Damien Echols, once sentenced to die, walked into the sunlight for the first time in 6,170 days. Jason Baldwin emerged quietly, still stunned. He had long resisted any deal that didn't fully clear their names, but agreed to it so Damien could live. Jesse Kelly said little. His journey had begun with a coerced confession and ended with a plea he barely understood. Outside the courthouse, cheers rang out. Supporters cried, signs were lifted, hugs exchanged. It was a moment of triumph and of sorrow, because for many, justice had not been served. The killers of Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers had not been officially identified, and the men many believed to be innocent were still labeled as guilty in the eyes of the law. In the weeks that followed, reactions were mixed. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a travesty. The families of the victims were divided. Some accepted the pleas as closure. Others believed the West Memphis Three were guilty and had simply escaped accountability. The state stood by the convictions, but quietly closed the case. For Damien, Jason, and Jesse, life outside prison was not freedom in the fullest sense. They had no compensation, no apology, no official exoneration, but they had each other, and the hope that one day the truth would be fully acknowledged by everyone. Today, the story of the West Memphis Three remains one of the most haunting, controversial, and divisive cases in American legal history. 3 young boys were brutally murdered. 3 teenagers were convicted under a cloud of panic, fear, and speculation. And nearly 2 decades later, they were released, but never fully cleared. In the years since their release, Damien Echols has become a writer, speaker, and advocate for criminal justice reform. He speaks openly about trauma, faith, and resilience, and continues to fight for a full exoneration. Jason Baldwin co-founded the Proclaim Justice Foundation, helping other wrongfully convicted prisoners seek freedom. Quiet, reserved, but fiercely committed to truth. Jesse Kelly lives a quieter life. He has largely avoided the spotlight, still struggling with the weight of a confession he says he didn't understand and can never take back. As of today, no one else has been charged with the murders of Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. The case remains closed, officially, but to many, the real killers are still out there. This case raised deep questions. How do we define justice? How do we protect the innocent in a system that sometimes gets it wrong? And how do we ensure that fear never replaces facts? The West Memphis Three paid a price that can never be repaid, and the families of 3 little boys continue to live with an unimaginable loss. If you've made it this far, thank you. Your time means everything to us. Telling these stories takes time, care, and a deep respect for both the victims and the wrongfully accused. If you believe in shining a light on the truth, please consider supporting us. If you haven't already, do us a favor. Click that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Your support is one of the biggest sources of encouragement we have, and it helps us continue creating content that matters. The West Memphis Three, a story of horror, injustice, and an ongoing fight for the truth. Thank you for watching.